Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about quite possibly the scariest patch in Dead by Daylight history, and not just because of the new killer, but also due to many of the changes that are being tested in this PTB. Big changes to anti-slugging, anti-tunnel, huge reworks to characters like Myers, all things we're going to talk about today. But first off, the new killer and new survivor, who are coming in the new chapter Sinister Grace, a Thai folklore-focused chapter, with the killer being the Krasue. Its power is admittedly a little bit confusing when you first read it. It's not very clear in writing, I would say, but in gameplay it's fairly simple, and fairly similar to a character like Plague, where you have to first infect them with a shot and then follow up with some damage. The main two modes of her power are a head mode and a sort of body mode, I guess, a mode with the body. Whilst you're in the body, you can infect but also hit normally, and then the head mode is sort of a faster mode where you can inflict damage as long as the survivor is infected by your leeching ability. It took some getting used to, but I do think it's actually pretty decent. It seems a little weak, I think. There's lots of chances for survivors to work together and actually sort of body block, making it quite difficult. Also, the lunge the head has is a bit awkward, I would say. Overall, though, it feels like quite a unique power, and I'm interested to see how it works when coming to live. It's definitely unique in the way it looks and plays. They've also decided to reuse the third-person mode again, a bit like they've done with Chucky. This does create sort of an interesting dynamic between the body mode and the head mode having different sort of playstyles. I'm not too sure how I feel about it at the moment, but again, we'll see when it comes to live. Let me know your thoughts too. The new killer perks are sort of okay overall. I like how they've gone with a bit of a different route for them. They've tried to make them a little bit more interesting, but they're just fine, I think. The new survivor is named Vee, and she's a drummer. Pretty cool. The highlight of her, I think at least, is her drum perk, which much like the Bard's loot perk, you're able to play and it gives a small AoE bonus. Road Life takes the cake for possibly the worst perk they've ever made. And Ghost Notes is seemingly quite powerful, maybe completely overpowered with its ability to remove scratch marks almost entirely when you pair it up with Lightweight. Overall though, in regards to the new chapter stuff, I think it's really good. I think the new killer is pretty scary. The splitting off in the menus especially is a really freaky thing to watch. I do think parts of it look a little bit goofy, a bit like what we had with Unknown. I think there's lots of scary parts to it, but there's also lots of slightly goofy looking parts, but I think it's fine overall. Moving on to the truly scary part of this update though, I think at least, is all of the other changes they've made in this patch. There's lots of things being tested, and in fairness to them, they did make it very clear that these are all just being tested. These aren't guaranteed to all come to live. And there's a really good chance, I think, that very few of these changes actually come to life. At least, I hope so. Because these are looking pretty scary if they do. I do want to say too, though, that I think a lot of them have good intentions behind them. They're just not executed particularly well as of now. Lots of them have a good idea behind them, but the numbers are just a bit too high or need to be tweaked around a little bit, I think. One thing I'm really not feeling, though, is the rework to Myers. So Myers has been completely reworked now, and he works very differently. He's got 3 different modes: Stalker, Pursuer, and Evil Incarnate. Whilst he's in his Stalker mode, he's able to stalk. Once you've filled your stalk, you can go into Evil Incarnate mode. He can then also switch to Pursuer mode, where he becomes a bit faster and has a terror radius, where he doesn't before. Pursuer mode is sort of just a basic M1 mode, if you just want to chase regularly without using any of your powers. He then has Evil Incarnate mode, which is basically what Tier 3 used to be, and he's able to activate it for 40 seconds. He vaults faster, and he has a new ability called Slaughtering Strike, which is this new sort of dash ability, and I think it looks really bizarre. And it's got this strange sound effect when he switches to it as well. It's like a whoop, whoop. It sounds really odd. I think my main issue with this ability though, and one of the core strengths of Myers to begin with, was that he was so faithful to himself in the films. His gameplay felt very Myers-esque. This doesn't really feel like Myers. It feels really bizarre seeing him switch up his stance and then suddenly dashing at you really quickly. It looks really goofy, I think, and it doesn't really fit his vibe at all. It's quite a bizarre experience, I think. One thing I do like though is that he's no longer able to fully run out of his power, which is a thing they should have done to begin with his original power, as in you can stalk as much as you want and you can never run out, which was actually a possibility before, which is kind of silly I think. He's also able to Mori survivors as a base kit option now, once he's double hooked them. This is also pretty cool I think, and that's a nice sort of lore accurate fitting something in there that works quite well I think. Compared to the dash ability, I'm not too sure what they were thinking with that, to be completely honest. I really don't think it works too well. The other thing I don't like about this Myers change is I actually think it's made him a bit less interesting overall. I'm not too sure why they would have done this, and I really don't like it. I really hope this update doesn't go through, or at the very least I hope they heavily adjust it, because I feel like this is very ill-fitting for Myers, just overall. I don't like it, I'm sorry. The next thing they've introduced is the tunneling reduction update, and this simply aims to stop tunneling in quite a simple way by blocking the killer's information on the hooks. So when you hook a survivor now, as the killer, it actually shrouds over the survivor. There's this sort of black cloud that covers their name and covers their hook states. Once the survivor is unhooked, it actually takes 10 seconds before the killer gets to see that they've been unhooked. Unless, of course, you're looking at them being unhooked. But if you're far away and you can't see the hook, it takes 10 seconds for the fog cloud to dissipate so that you can actually see that's happened. The only time this goes away is in the endgame once all generators are completed, which seems pretty fair. A bit like the anti-camp feature, the anti-tunnel feature also turns off when all gens are done. Survivors also get bigger protections though as well, which I think is maybe where the problem is here. I think it should either be one or the other. You either shroud the killer's vision, or you give survivors extra protections. I think both of them is just a bit too extreme, especially because there's lots of times when you could almost like accidentally tunnel someone this way, because the new unhook protections actually last for quite a while. They last for 30 seconds. You get 10% haste, the endurance status, and the elusive status, which is a new status effect, which hides your grunts of pain, aura, scratch marks, and pools of blood. You further get no collision with other players, and you can see the killer's aura within 32 meters. You further can't be revealed with Killer Instinct, which seems ridiculous, and you get immune to any AFK crows. There's so much here, like, the list just literally keeps going on for all these protections. Again, bear in mind too, the killer is also having their vision shrouded of what's going on. Unless they're by the hook, the survivor is still getting all of these things. It's a bit insane. Even during the endgame as well, survivors will still get some of these protections for 30 seconds, the two being the endurance and haste statuses, which are still those two alone are still incredibly powerful. So yeah, this update really can't go through, I think. This is just insane, I think, sort of overcorrection almost for tunneling. I personally quite liked the shrouding effect when I was playing it on the killer side. I think removing that from the HUD and forcing killers to sort of look elsewhere in the trial and not focus so much on the person they've just hooked is actually quite good, so I quite like that change. But I think the change for all of these protections on top of that is just a bit insane, especially as these could so easily be used to body block for other people, or simply to, I don't know, get right into another chase with a killer. You have 30 seconds to do that, so it just seems a bit extreme. I mean, the protection list is insane, literally insanely long. It shouldn't be that long. It's ridiculous. However, the killer is also getting a bunch of new things too, with unique hook bonuses. And this is another layer to anti-tunnel, but on the killer side, which basically is trying to get the killer to go away from the hook and do something else. When a killer hooks someone, they get a 20% bonus to the next generator they damage, they get a 10% haste for 15 seconds, they reveal all survivors outside of 40 meters for 4 seconds, a bit like a base kit barbecue effect, with the only downside being that the killer actually has to physically do these things themselves. They have to actually pick up the survivor and go and hook them. And there's a few killers who have slightly different rules, presumably because they're quite powerful, or they've got a lot of movement ability. I think that's what they were going for with this. So the Blight, the Dark Lord, Dracula, the Ghoul, Billy, Krasue, and Nurse get half the bonus damage to the next generator, so 10%, and 5% haste for 10 seconds instead of 10%. But they still get the same aura revealing ability, which I would say is probably the most powerful part of this. I would say in regards to these, they're not needed at all. I think the killer-sided things, they literally could just remove. The survivor ones, they need to tone down significantly, and the shrouding ability thing, I think is pretty cool. That's sort of my rundown on this. Lots of cool ideas in there. I like what they're going for, but this is way too much stuff, especially all at once. It's so cluttered, it's gonna be tough to see how it can play out on live, I think. Maybe keep a small haste bonus for the killer side when hooking, that could be kinda nice. Keep a few of the unhook protections for survivors, maybe also like the haste status for a bit, a slightly longer duration of endurance. Things like that I think are actually fine. And then the shrouding ability for killer I think actually works pretty well too. Again, even as a killer, I quite enjoyed that actually. There's more though, with tunneling penalties. When a survivor dies to a hook action or mori before 6 total hook states, the remaining survivors get a 25% repair speed bonus. That's insane. 25% is madness. This means, by the way, too, that it's possible you're down to 1 gen as killer, but you just managed to kill 1 survivor, and now for the final gen they all have 25% extra repair speed. Just because you didn't manage to hit 6 hooks yet. It's a bit silly in situations like that. This could potentially work better if there was sort of a scale, so depending on the survivors and relating to the amount of gens, that's how much the survivor repair speed gets buffed, for example, but I think in this current version, it simply doesn't make much sense. It should not be like this. Moving on now to the slugging reduction update, and this was one I actually had a bit more of a favourable opinion on. I didn't find it so bothersome as killer, and as survivor I quite liked it too. Although once again it does seem very overtuned, I would say is the word. So now a bit like anti-camp, there's sort of an anti-slug feature, so there's a secondary bar when you go down on the floor that sort of shows your anti-slug progress, which takes 90 seconds to fill, and once it's filled, it lets you just revive yourself without the use of any perk. So basically slugging has a 90-second limit now. Survivors get a bit more than this now though. They can also cruel and recover at the same time, a bit like tenacity. They also seem to be a bit faster whilst crueling. I could be wrong on that, but it feels a bit faster. Regardless, it increases over time, so the more you cruel, the faster you go, basically. This doesn't seem as bad or as extreme, I would say, as the anti-tunneling update. I would say this one has a lot more good intentions with what it's trying to do, but once again, it's just a bit too overtuned. I think, for example, the base kit tenacity is debatably the bigger issue here, because you're able to cruel away, which actually often extends the time you're going to get slugged, because the killer then can't find you, the game goes on for a longer period. A lot of the time, that makes things worse, I would argue. And there's not really a downside to it for Survivor, as it takes nothing to simply continue crueling. I think this was fine as a perk with tenacity. Being able to automatically recover after 90 seconds is fine, but I think the base kit tenacity effects and faster crueling speed is basically just unhelpful. Especially considering there's lots of killers who can down people from a long range, and they need time to get over to the person they've just downed, even if they aren't slugging. For example, you could hit a really nice cross-map shot as Huntress, but then by the time you get to that person, they've crawled off due to the tenacity effect, and they've also recovered, and so they're back up again by the time you arrive. Or someone like Twinsay, someone like Knight. There's lots of killers who can down people from further than just, I don't know, like invisible range, basically. So that's my sort of takeaway from that. I think it's fine. I think the 90-second sort of anti-slug bar seems fine to me, but I think the tenacity part of it and recovering faster and moving faster is the not so okay part. There was also a pallet density quality of life update, so they added a bunch more pallets to dead zones on various maps. The thing is, it's a bit of a mixed bag of the maps they've done this to. So the Macmillan Estate, Autohaven, Coldwind Farm, Crotus Pren, Haddonfield, Backwater Swamp, Red Forest, Yamokra Estate, Ormond, and Borgo. Now, there's certain maps on there that really do not need this, like Crotus Pren. I don't know why you'd need more pallets on that map. That map is already so stacked for survivors. Both the Asylum and Father Campbell's Chapel even, I would say, are both pretty stacked for survivors. There's some odd decisions here, and I think the issue with dead zones more so is changing how the map layout is. It's less to do with just filling it with stuff, I would say. Or alternately, relocating the resources from resource-dense areas and putting them in the dead zones, rather than just adding more resources, which just makes the powerful maps even more powerful for survivors and even more tough for killers. A lot of dead zones could be fixed, for example, just by moving some resources around, or simply shrinking certain areas of the map, or just adding different things to interact with, like new windows, or just new slight tiles that can be used a bit more creatively, but don't need to have windows or pallets. Next, we've got a bunch of changes to killers and perks, and I thought for this I'd sort of just speedrun my thoughts, because I think there's just so much to go in depth with, and a lot of them can just be talked about with a simple good or bad or okay. So I'm going to try and do that just for basically all of the new stuff. There's a bunch of survivor perk changes, a bunch of killer perk changes, a bunch of changes to killers too. So let's just go through them speedrun, and I'll say good, bad, or okay, and briefly give my thoughts if I think there's something worthwhile saying. Unknown, amazing, actually makes it a lot easier to play, I would say, and a bit more rewarding, so that's good. Dracula changes seem okay, I think. It's a bit of a mixed bag. Some of the adjustments seem sort of fine, others don't seem so fair, so I'm going to go with okay on that one. I'm not really sure why Dracula needed changes, to be honest. I think he was kind of fine. He was strong, but I think he was fine. Clown changes, I'm going okay as well. They've increased the activation time of the yellow cloud again, which I think is okay. That change is fine. The other change worries me a little bit, which is having a longer duration of hindered once you exit a pink cloud, so yeah, I don't know so much for that one. Ghoul, that's good. Oni, also very good. Survivor perks. Babysitter seems to have gotten a rework due to the anti-tunnel update, and I think this rework is fine. I would say it's overall enough though, but I think this is fine considering. It's still pretty decent. Borrowed time, I think, is insane, because this gives survivors you unhook an additional 12 seconds of protection, which is 42 seconds, by the way. That's madness. That can't go through. No way. Clairvoyance, good. Friendly competition, good. Hope, I would say bad. I think it was fine as is. It was strong, but it was an endgame only perk, so I'm not sure why that was changed. No Mither, great change. Off the record, good change as well. I really don't like that perk. Leader, good changes. Nice buff. Lucky Star, sure, good change. I think that perk could use a complete overhaul though, personally. It's a bit of a weird one. Pharmacy is okay, sort of a side grade, I'd say. One part gets buffed, the other part gets nerfed. I'm not sure why this perk is getting nerfed at all, honestly, so I would say okay. Plot twist, yeah, good change, I'd say. Poised, really good change. This perk direly needed a buff. I think it could still be buffed even more than this though. Quick Gambit, good change. Tenacity, a bit of a weird change. This could be quite powerful, and I worry it's going to be used in the wrong way than it's intending. So I'm going to say bad change for this. I mean, I think they shouldn't go through with the base kit tenacity changes, the base kit old tenacity changes, so yeah, I don't like this change either, really. Vigil, I'd say good too. You can no longer stack the perk, which I think is probably quite a good thing. It stops teams sort of abusing it, I'd say. Killer perk changes. All Shaking Thunder, good change, nice buff. A Nurse's Cooling, also good change, nice buff. Barbecue and Chili could debatably be a bit too overpowered once you get it going. This is sort of a tough one, but a base 5% damage to all generators after hooking your survivors could be very strong, although it does rely on you hooking your survivors, which, as we've seen with old Grim Embrace, for example, it doesn't always work out that way, so it can be kind of hard to activate, so probably not as good as it sounds. I'm going to say this one's sort of just okay. Dark Arrogance, I would say good. Deadman Switch, I'm going to say good as well. I do think it's a little bit overtuned at the moment, so nice change there. Deerstalker's quite interesting, and is almost like old Object of Obsession, kind of. And it also tries to get you to chase people with the lowest chase time, which is a really cool effect. I feel like they could implement it maybe in a slightly better way though, that isn't so punishing to survivors using killer aura reveal perks. Otherwise though, I would say this is a pretty good change. Eruption, I would say, is sort of okay. I don't think it was that strong anymore, so I'm going to just say okay for that one. Ruin, I'm going to say good change as well. I think this perk has needed a little bit of a buff for a while now, so I'm going to say that one's okay. or good even. Leverage, I think this is a pretty fair exchange, I would say. Having a lower heal speed reduction, but also a longer duration, I think that's pretty good, so that's good. Monitor and Abuse, I would say good buff. Pop, I would say this is a good change. I think this perk is kind of boring, so I welcome any nerfs to it personally. Oppression, really good buff I think, and makes this perk even more viable. Pain Res gets another nerf. I would say something closer to 15% would be fine. I would actually say this is a bit overkill, so I'm going to say okay. Septic Touch gets a bit of a buff as well. I'll say good for this. It needs it, so yeah. Ultimate Weapon, I'd say good. So overall, a really interesting patch, and I'm really glad they've done this. They've gone all out testing a bunch of things and really shaking things up, which I really appreciate. But this is also super scary if this ever goes live. This is one of the scariest patches they've ever cooked up. And if it does go live, I think it's going to just completely break the game. It's going to feel very different. But I'm glad they tested it, and I really hope they take the notes they receive from the PTB and they come back with something that's just a bit more balanced. Because at the moment, I think, again, there's lots of good intentions here. There's lots of good ideas, but they're not executed quite as well as they could be. So I would say, overall, really fun PTB, really cool idea, great new killer. New stuff is cool, but just some scary stuff when it comes to lots of the reworks and new anti sort of introductions they're making. So yeah, do hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts as always down below. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.